Hi! Within this lecture, we're going to officially start writing our first Python code. And we're going to work with notebooks, so I'm going to create a new notebook from here. And remember, I'm going to save my notebooks and share all of them with you in the GitHub. But I really recommend you to not only watch me and take notes, but also write your own code at the same time within the Jupyter notebook. I'm going to share this with you anyway, but just use them as references and try to write synchronously with me so that you can practice and learn it better. So let's create our first notebook, and let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it better from here. And I'm going to change the name of it. So I'm going to give numbers to my notebooks, and this is just for me to track the notebook so I can share with you properly. Don't worry about the numbers. I will share every notebook after each individual lecture. So if you don't want to name this with numbers, you're of course welcome to do that. And I'm going to name these variables. That's what we're going to talk about a little bit in this lecture and the following lecture, okay? I'm going to rename this notebook as variables, and I will start to write my code. So, in the previous lecture, when we first actually installed the Jupyter notebook, we have written some print arguments, right? Like print hello world. But if that was the first time that you have encountered with programming, maybe you got confused. Okay, why are we printing? Why are we just writing some things and getting some outputs? Actually, the programming is like that. Like if I type 5 plus 6 and hit run or shift enter, I got output of 11, right? So Python actually makes this calculation for me. If I just want Python to print something, it will print something. If I just Python to calculate something, it will calculate. I write code and Python just takes care of the rest and does this stuff for me. So if I want Python to go to the internet and download me something, it will do so, and we will learn how to do that in future, of course. But the general idea is that we want to sum like 1500 and 494, it will sum, okay? So as you can see, we can do the basic math. Like if I divide 900 by 7, it will just divide and give me the exact number of it. Of course, we can do the other operations as well, like multiplication or deduction, like 500 minus 200, or let's do some multiplication, so 120. So it's correct. So there are other ways to just make this easy for us. Like what? So for example, if I want to multiply 2 by 3 times, what do? Of course, you write 2 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 2, and it will give me 8. But there's a shortcut to do that actually. And it goes like this: 2 star star 3. It means that 2 to the power 3, okay? Of course, in this case it was simple. But if I wanted to just multiply 2 by 9 times, it would have been much simpler for me to write it like this. So I get 512 as an output. So, other than this, what can we do with Python in mathematical equations? There is a thing called remainder, for example. If I divide a number by another number, what is the remainder of that dividing operation? So if you divide 10 by 2, what do you get as a remainder? 0, correct? Because 2 times 5 is actually equal to 10. So let's try this with Python, and remainder is shown as percentage. So it goes like this: 10 percent sign and 2 shift enter, it will give you an output of 0. So let's do another example like 11% sign and 2, it will give you 1, of course, because the remainder of 11 divided by 2 is actually 1. Let's do another example, 11 divided by 3, so the remainder will be 2, because 3 times 3 is equal to 9 and 11 minus 9 is equal to 2. So the remainder is 2. I hope you know about this general simple mathematical concepts. This is very helpful when you want to find out a number is either an even number or an odd number. For example, if you get the remainder of it and it returns 0, then it means that it's an even number. Okay, enough for the mathematical operations. Now let's talk about different kinds of numbers. So as you can see, we had this decimal number in here like 0.5. Okay, if I just multiply 0.5 by 3, I get 1.5. So we call this kind of numbers floats and integers. Okay, so integer is a whole number. It doesn't have a decimal, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 6. And the other kind of that we were talking about was float. So 1.5 is actually a float, 0.4 is actually a float. If I just multiply these two floats, I got out of a float which is 1.20. And don't worry about this 0.0002 decimal thing. It is related to how Python actually interprets the decimal numbers. It won't cause any messy thing in your calculations, but it will just change the decimal and in a little minor way. Okay, but this is what you should know. Whole numbers are integers, decimal numbers are floats, and they are two different kinds of datas in Python. Okay, so if some function, if some code expects you to give an integer, you should give a whole number. If on the other hand it expects a float, you should give out a float. So maybe it doesn't make sense to you right now, but it will as we move along. All you have to do is just now understand that integers are whole numbers, whereas the floats are numbers with decimals. Now we're going to stop here, and within the next lecture we're going to introduce a concept called variables, so that we won't have only predefined values but also changing values as we move along with the code.